He stood at her wedding and smiled for every photograph. He helped her carry boxes into her new home with his own 2 hands. He told police with tears streaming down his face that she was the nicest person in the entire world. And then one night, without warning, without reason, he came back to that same house and took everything from her. This was not a stranger. This was not random. This was not some faceless monster crawling out of the dark. This was someone who had been close to Gail her entire life. Someone who knew exactly which room she slept in. Someone who knew her husband would come outside without hesitation if he asked for help. And for 25 years, he sat with the family at every gathering, every funeral, every anniversary, while 2 families spent decades asking a question whose answer was standing right in front of them the entire time. If this kind of story keeps you up at night the way it keeps me up, hit that like button right now, subscribe to this channel, and share this video with someone who loves true crime, because the case you are about to hear is one of the most disturbing, most calculated, most personal betrayals I have ever covered. And it stayed cold for 25 years for reasons that will make your blood run cold. Now let us get into it. Holland, Michigan. Small town. Quiet streets. The kind of place where people still leave their doors unlocked at night without thinking twice about it. Dutch heritage runs deep here. Church steeples rising above the skyline. Tulip gardens lining the sidewalks. Neighbors waving from their front porches on summer evenings. People who grow up in Holland describe it as one of those rare places in America where you actually feel safe. Where nothing bad is supposed to happen. Where the worst thing that ever happened was probably a car accident or a barn fire somewhere outside of town. Nobody expects something like this to happen in a place like Holland. But evil does not care about tulip gardens. It does not care about quiet streets or church choirs or the way neighbors wave from their porches. Evil grows slowly and quietly in the dark, behind closed doors, inside families, inside people who have learned to wear the right face for every room they walk into. And one house, on a road called Ransom Street, a name that feels almost too fitting now, would become the center of something that shook this entire community all the way down to its foundation. Gail Marie Wingarden was born on April 24, 1965. She grew up in a large and close-knit family. 8 children living under one roof, which meant noise and chaos and never enough of anything, but also a kind of closeness that only comes from having no other choice. Their father, Wendell, was a World War II veteran. Steady, faithful, the kind of man who spent 26 years at the same job and 50 years in the same church without ever once complaining about either one. Their mother, Dorothy, held everything together the way mothers in large families always do, quietly and without applause. Money was tight in that household. Sometimes painfully so. But what they lacked financially, they made up for in closeness. Everyone worked. Everyone contributed. And Gail absorbed that lesson early and carried it with her into everything she ever did. She made herself a quiet promise as a little girl. She was going to work hard, save her own money, and build her own life on her own terms. She told her older sister Cheryl that she would work as hard as she needed to so she could always afford whatever she wanted for herself. Not out of greed. Not out of selfishness. Out of pure burning determination to never feel powerless about her own future. Her first job was waitressing. Low base pay, long shifts, sore feet by the end of every night. But Gail had something that could not be taught in any classroom or training program. She had a natural warmth. A charm that made every single customer feel like the most important person in the room. She was quick with a joke, funny without trying, the kind of person who made the work feel lighter just by being there. People tipped her well, not out of obligation, but because she genuinely made their day better simply by existing in it. One person who knew her later described Gail as liquid sunshine. Said that when she walked into a room, something shifted in the air. The energy lifted. People smiled without knowing exactly why. That was just Gail. That was always Gail, from the time she was old enough to carry a conversation. And then there was Ryan. Ryan Wingarden was born December 12, 1962. 2.5 years older than his little sister. To everyone who knew the family, he was exactly what a big brother was supposed to be. Tall, quiet, solid. He kept an eye on Gail the way protective older brothers do. Noticing when someone looked at her the wrong way. Stepping closer when she seemed uncomfortable. Making his presence known without always having to say a word. From the outside, it looked like devotion. It looked like loyalty. It looked like exactly the kind of big brother every younger sister deserves. But Ryan was not just watching over her. He was watching her. And there is a thin, dangerous, almost invisible line between protection and possession. Nobody saw that line back then. Nobody thought to look for it. And that failure to look would cost two people everything. When Gail was 18, she met a man named Lars. It moved fast the way young relationships often do when you are still figuring out who you are and what you actually need from another person. Before long, they were living together. They even built a house together. It looked serious from the outside. But underneath the surface, something was not working. Lars was not consistent. The imbalance between them kept growing, quietly at first and then loudly enough that Gail could no longer ignore it. She tried to hold it together the way she always tried. She gave it more than it probably deserved. But eventually she reached the point that every honest person reaches when they stop lying to themselves. Trying harder with the wrong person is not courage. It is just delay with extra steps. So she made her decision, packed her things, and went back to collect what was hers. Lars did not take it well. As Gail reached into a drawer to gather her belongings, Lars slammed it shut on her hand. When she pulled back from the pain, he hit her across the face hard enough to leave a black eye. Word got back to Ryan fast. He went straight to Lars. No long conversation. No warning. He knocked him down and broke his nose. Then he looked at Lars and said it quietly, almost calmly. "Do not ever touch my sister again." Lars backed off. The situation was over. And Ryan walked away looking like a hero. Cold, controlled, not shaking with rage the way most brothers would have been. Just calm. As if something had been handled that needed handling and now it was done. At the time, nobody thought anything of it. He was the protective big brother. He had shown up when it mattered. That was the story everyone believed. That was the story everyone told themselves. But that calm, that cold, quiet, almost eerie calm was not protection. It was something else entirely. Something nobody would understand for another 25 years. What happened next was the best thing that ever happened to Gail Windgarden. And because of what came after, it is also the hardest part of this story to sit with for very long. In 1984, Gail went back to work, back to her routine, back to building the life she had always promised herself she would build. And it was there, at work, that she met a 25-year-old contractor named Rick Brink. Rick Brink was not a complicated man. He was the kind of person whose hands were always rough from working with wood. Whose word meant something. Whose patience never seemed to run out no matter what the day threw at him. Quiet confidence, no performance, no pretense. He showed up every single time exactly when he was supposed to. He was the kind of man you could set your clock by because his consistency was that reliable. When he met Gail at work in 1984, he went home and told his mother something simple. He said, "I just met the woman I am going to marry." He was not being dramatic. He was not being romantic for the sake of it. He was just being Rick. Honest, straightforward, certain in the way that only comes from recognizing something real when it is standing right in front of you. They fit together in the way that actually lasts. Not fireworks in chaos and the kind of intensity that burns itself out inside of 6 months. Something steadier than that. Something built from the same foundation. Both of them had grown up understanding that nothing good comes without hard work. Both of them carried the same quiet hunger for a real life. Not a flashy one, not a dramatic one. A solid one. A home they could build with their own hands. Careers they could be proud of. A family they could grow deliberately and with intention. Rick worked as a carpenter trainer at a furniture manufacturing company called Trenway. He was respected there. Reliable, skilled, exactly the kind of employee you build an entire team around and hope never leaves. Gail worked in an office at Donald Automotive. Focused, diligent, always early. Her co-workers described her as someone who got things done without making noise about it, which from people who work in offices is about the highest compliment you can pay someone. Bill Wheaton, one of Rick's closest friends, would later say about Gail what everyone who had ever spent time with her also eventually said. He confirmed she really was the sunshine of every room she walked into. Rick already knew that. He had known it since the first day he ever saw her. Summers meant Lake Michigan. Rick's family had a house on the shore and a boat on the water, and those two things together are just about the best combination a Michigan summer can offer. He taught Gail to water ski. Long warm afternoons out on the lake, coming back sunburned and laughing and hungrier than either of them expected. Evenings with family that stretched on longer than anyone planned because nobody actually wanted them to end. Those summers were not just good times. They were proof. Proof that these two people made each other genuinely happy in the quiet, everyday, ordinary way that actually matters when you get down to it. On April 25, 1986, one day after Gail turned 21, they got married. Small church. The people who mattered most. Nothing more than that, because nothing more than that was needed. Gail wore a white dress with a flared skirt and thin spaghetti straps. Rick wore a bright blue suit jacket with a matching bow tie and looked exactly like a man who had just won something he had been quietly working toward his whole life. The reception was at a lakefront country club. They danced through the entire evening. Gail laughed more than she sat still, which was exactly as expected for anyone who knew her. When it finally ended, they left for a honeymoon cruise. Beaches, warm water, no schedule, and nowhere to be except with each other. When they came back, the real work began. Rick's father, Garrett, found them a property on the outskirts of Holland. A ranch-style house on a road called Ransom Street. 20 acres of open land surrounding it. Quiet, far enough from town that the nearest neighbor was not particularly close. The kind of place that feels like freedom when you first see it, like you could breathe all the way out for the first time in years. But the house had been through hard times. The previous owner, a man locals knew as Shotgun Sid, had lost it when the bank foreclosed on his mortgage. Before he left, Sid stripped what he could. Fixtures pulled from walls, cabinets hanging by a single hinge, rooms that looked like someone had given up on them halfway through and simply walked away. Garrett negotiated a price that made it possible for the young couple. And Rick walked through every single damaged room and saw exactly what it could become with the right amount of work and patience and time. That isolation, 20 acres, no close neighbors, a house that still needed everything, it made the property feel like their own private world. Beautiful in that way. But also quietly vulnerable in a way that nobody stopped to think about at the time. They moved in during October of 1987 and attacked the renovation immediately. Floors sanded down and refinished. Walls patched and repainted. Cabinets replaced. Rick documented everything on a home video camera, walking from room to room, narrating the progress in that easy, unhurried voice of his. Every time he turned the camera toward Gail, she stopped whatever she was doing and smiled. Sometimes she waved. Sometimes she laughed at something he said off camera. There is one moment in that footage that is almost impossible to watch knowing what comes next. Rick panned the camera slowly through a small empty room at the end of the hallway. Bare walls, unfinished floor, just an empty space waiting to become something. That room was supposed to be the nursery. Gail had already told her sister Cheryl about it. She described the wallpaper she wanted, where the crib would sit, exactly how she planned to decorate it. She and Rick were ready. That was their next step. That empty room at the end of the hallway was going to be filled with everything they had been working towards since the day they first met. It never got that far. On the evening of November 21, 1987, Rick and Gail dressed up and went to a friend's wedding reception at a Holiday Inn. They danced. They celebrated. Rick had a few drinks. Gail got a little tipsy and laughed about it. People who were there that night remembered them moving through the room completely at ease. Two people who had exactly what they wanted and felt absolutely no need to prove it to anyone around them. Around 11 in the evening, they said their goodbyes and walked out into the cold Michigan night together. The air was sharp the way late November always is in Holland. They got into the car. Headlights cutting through the dark. The familiar drive back toward Ransom Street. 20 acres waiting in the quiet. Their home, their renovation, that empty room at the end of the hallway. Nobody at that reception watched them leave and thought anything of it. People leave weddings every single night. But no one from that room would ever speak to Rick or Gail Brink again. Monday morning, November 23rd. Rick Brink did not show up for work. His boss at Trenway noticed it within the first hour. Rick was not the kind of man who disappeared without a word. He was not the kind of person whose absence you explained away with a simple "oh, he must be running late." He was the kind of man whose absence felt immediately, deeply, unmistakably wrong. The kind you notice the second the clock moves past when he should have walked through the door. His boss called the house. The phone rang. Nobody answered. He called again. Same result. That uneasy feeling that starts as something small and grows fast was already spreading by the time he picked up the phone a third time. He called Rick's parents. Garrett and Ida had not heard from their son. Garrett called Gail's workplace. The person on the other end told him Gail had not come in either. Both of them. Same morning. No call, no message, no explanation from either one. Garrett and Ida got in the car. Imagine that drive. The silence sitting between two parents when neither one wants to say out loud what they are both already thinking. When they turned onto that quiet stretch of Ransom Street and pulled up to the property, the first thing they saw was Rick's Chevrolet Blazer parked in the driveway. A small moment of relief. If the car was there, he was home. He must be home. Garrett walked toward the vehicle. The engine was cold. Rick was inside, but he was not sitting up. His body was slumped forward, knees against the floorboard, torso folded across the console, his head resting near the passenger door. The morning light hit the glass and revealed the devastating truth of what had happened to him. Garrett's world collapsed in that moment. He turned back, steadied Ida, walked her to their car, and made sure she stayed there. Then he did something that no father should ever have to do. He turned around and walked into that house alone. The front door was undamaged. No broken lock, no forced entry, nothing out of place in the hallway. Garrett moved through the quiet toward the primary bedroom. That specific silence, not peaceful, just empty and wrong in a way that pressed against him the entire way. He pushed the bedroom door open. Gail was in the waterbed. The surface had long since settled around her. Still, flat, not a ripple. She looked like she was sleeping. Her position was natural, undisturbed. There was a pillow resting over her face. Garrett lifted it. He walked back outside, called the police, and sat next to his wife in the car. He did not tell her what he had seen. He did not have to. When deputies arrived and began moving through the house, the crime scene did something unusual. Instead of pointing toward a suspect, it quietly eliminated almost everything. No forced entry anywhere. Every door intact. Every window unbroken. Whoever came into that house that night, Rick or Gail had let them in. Or at the very minimum, one of them had. Nothing stolen. Not one single item disturbed. Rick's wallet was sitting on the kitchen counter. Gail's purse was right beside it. Both full. Cash, credit cards, identification, all of it completely untouched. Investigators found $280 in the bedroom and $240 in a kitchen drawer. Over $500 sitting in plain sight. The killer had walked past every single cent of it without pausing. Both victims still wearing their wedding rings. Jewelry sitting on the dresser. 2 watches in the house. Not one thing taken. This was never about money. This was never random. This was never a stranger who happened upon an isolated property on a dark night. Rick's blazer gave investigators their first real detail. The driver's side window was rolled slightly down, just a few inches. And the passenger window had a bullet hole punched through it. Glass pushed outward. A missed shot, which meant Rick had been sitting behind the wheel when someone stood outside that passenger window and fired. You do not roll your window down for a stranger. Not at night. Not on a dark, isolated property with 20 acres of nothing around you. Rick lowered that window because he recognized the person standing there. Because he felt no reason whatsoever to be afraid. Inside the bedroom, 3 deliberate rounds had been fired while Gail was still in bed. Controlled. No signs of struggle anywhere in the room. No evidence that she had even woken up. She never saw it coming. She never had a chance. Detectives searched the gravel outside, the grass, the carpet, the hallway floor, everywhere. Nothing. No brass. No shell casings anywhere on the property. The killer had not panicked and fled. They had taken the time, after 2 people lay dead, to make absolutely certain nothing was left behind. They were using a weapon that kept its secrets locked inside the cylinder. A .22 caliber revolver, confirmed later by forensics. They had walked in with a plan and followed it all the way through to the end. But one detail stopped the investigators completely cold. The pillow over Gail's face. When they examined it closely, there were no bullet holes in it. None. That meant it was not covering her when the shots were fired. It had been placed there afterward, by the killer, after she was already dead. And it was not even from the bedroom. It had come from the living room. Someone had walked to a completely different room, picked up that pillow, carried it back down the entire hallway, and laid it carefully over her face. Slow down and think about that for a moment. This was not a panicked killer rushing out of the house and into the night. This was someone who stopped. Who walked to another room. Who came back. Who covered her. Someone who could not stand to look at what they had just done to her. Someone carrying something, guilt, grief, obsession, something that forced them to hide her face before they could make themselves leave. That pillow was not evidence of violence. It was evidence of something far more disturbing than violence alone. It was evidence of intimacy. A personal, twisted, deeply emotional connection to the woman lying in that bed. And that detail would sit quietly in a case file for 25 years. When the right detectives finally picked it up, it would tell them exactly what kind of person they had been looking for all along. The early theories collapsed quickly one after another. Murder-suicide disappeared the moment investigators confirmed there was no weapon anywhere near Rick's body. Not in the blazer. Not beneath him. Not in the yard. Someone else had pulled that trigger. Both times. 6 fingerprints were recovered from the scene. 4 belonged to the victims. 1 on the toilet, 1 on the telephone. Neither matched anyone in any database. That was it. A pillow from the wrong room. A window rolled down for someone familiar. $500 left completely untouched. And 2 people who had been dancing at a wedding reception 48 hours earlier, now gone. At the funeral, the pastor looked out at a room full of broken people and opened with something nobody present would ever forget. He said, "This is not the work of the Lord. This is the work of the devil." Rick's brother Bud carried those words for the rest of his life. Every person in that room carried them, because they felt true in a way that went beyond anything religious or metaphorical. Whatever had walked into that house on Ransom Street, whatever had shot a sleeping woman and then stopped to cover her face with a pillow from the living room, that was something personal. Something dark. Something that had been building for a very, very long time. The investigation was about to go looking for a monster. But they were searching in entirely the wrong direction. The person they wanted was not hiding in the shadows somewhere out there beyond the reach of anyone who knew the family. He was standing right next to the grieving family. Helping carry the flowers. Telling anyone who would listen that Gail and Rick were the nicest people in the world. When investigators have a double murder and no physical evidence, they go back to the people. They start with whoever was closest to the victims and work carefully outward. They pull on every single thread until something gives. In this case, every thread snapped clean. The first name on the list was Lars, Gail's ex. The man who had put a black eye on her face during their breakup. A documented history of violence toward her. Still carrying feelings for her. Still bitter, according to people who knew him, that she had moved on and built something real with someone else. On paper, he looked exactly like the kind of person detectives needed to look at closely. They brought him in. Lars denied everything and did not hesitate for a single second when they offered a polygraph examination. He sat down, answered every question, and passed without any indication of deception. His alibi for the night of November 21st held up through multiple independent witnesses. He was ruled out before the week was over. A few days later, someone walked into the sheriff's office without being called. Nobody had tracked him down. He simply appeared. Sid Cobby, known throughout Ottawa County as Shotgun Sid. Sid had a history with that house on Ransom Street that went well beyond simply losing it to foreclosure. He had run drugs along routes from Detroit into western Michigan for a gang called the Highwaymen. He had moved weapons. He had lived exactly the kind of life where enemies are not just possible, they are guaranteed and they accumulate over time. And when he had grown disturbed watching dealers push product to high school kids in his community, he had flipped and become a federal informant. Which meant people inside those circles had very serious reasons to want him permanently silenced. Sid came in with a theory. He believed the killer had come looking for him and found the wrong family at the wrong address. He described what his life had looked like from that house. He told detectives that at one point, 3 men had shown up at Ransom Street with a shotgun and he had pulled his own weapon and held his ground until they backed off. That address had already seen threats before Gail and Rick ever moved in. Detectives dug into it. They contacted narcotics units with informants inside the gang. 2 names surfaced. One went by Ghetto. The other by Grizz. Grizz was shot dead in Detroit within a week of the Brink murders, which raised immediate and serious questions. Ghetto was interviewed and denied involvement convincingly. Sid even started making his own calls, working his contacts, trying to trace whether anyone had actually been sent to that address. He came back empty. The mistaken identity theory collapsed just like everything else had. Then Christmas Eve hit, and Holland got shaken all over again. Rock Wilson came home in the early hours of December 24th after a work party. Every light in his house was on. The back sliding door was wide open, leading out to a large dark field. His wife Deborah was nowhere inside. He called his father. Together they searched the field. She was found near the vegetable garden, having suffered a violent and fatal attack. Deborah Wilson was 30 years old. She had gone to the same high school as Rick Brink. Her house sat less than half a mile from Ransom Street. Close enough to walk between them in 5 minutes if you cut through the fields. The community did not stay calm about this. How could it? No forced entry at either scene. Nothing stolen from either home. Both victims described as quiet, hardworking, well-liked people with no obvious enemies. 1 month apart. Less than half a mile between them. Then investigators pulled an older case from 1977. A 20-year-old woman named Deborah Polinsky had been stabbed to death in her bedroom. Her home sat less than a mile from the Brink property. 3 violent deaths. Same small pocket of Ottawa County. Spread across a decade. People stopped leaving their doors unlocked. Neighbors who had waved at each other for years started watching each other with entirely new eyes. Residents sent petitions to the sheriff's department demanding more patrol presence. FBI behavioral experts were brought in. Michigan State Police consultants reviewed all 3 cases. Investigators searched for any overlap, any shared relationships, any mutual connections, any single common point of contact between any of the victims. Nothing aligned. Eventually, investigators concluded the 3 cases were unconnected. Separate killers. Separate motives. The pattern had been an illusion built out of fear and proximity. The community exhaled. But for the Brink family, the fear had never been about a serial killer. The fear was simpler and more personal than that. And it was nowhere close to being resolved. There was one detail from the original investigation that never made headlines but quietly refused to go away. One of Gail's coworkers came forward and said something that stopped investigators in place. She said that in the 2 weeks before the murders, Gail had changed. Not dramatically, but noticeably. The woman they all knew as someone who lit up every room she entered had pulled inward. Become quieter. More reserved. Like she was carrying something heavy that she had not been carrying before. The liquid sunshine had gone dark in those final 2 weeks. What had happened? What had she seen, or heard, or understood? What was pressing down on Gail Brink in those last 14 days of her life that she never told anyone about? That question went into the file with everything else. And then the file went into a cabinet. Months became years. The tips that had been coming in steadily, 4 or 5 a day at the peak, dried up completely. Every lead that looked promising dissolved on contact. The case settled into that particular silence that cold cases carry. Not forgotten. Just still. 10 years after the murders, a local newspaper ran a piece reminding readers that the case was still open. Rick's mother, Ida, spoke to the reporter. She said one thing that landed like a stone dropped into still water. She said, "You are thinking all the time, is that person around here? Does he look us in the face knowing he killed our son?" She had no idea how close she was. She had no idea the person she was describing had almost certainly stood beside her at the graveside. Had probably hugged her. Had looked her in the eye and called Gail the nicest person in the world. Wendell Wyngarden had survived a world war. Had spent decades of quiet, faithful service to his church, his family, and his community. But he could not survive the weight of not knowing what had happened to his daughter. He died in July 2005, 18 years after Gail was taken from him, and was buried with the military honors he had earned. He took every unanswered question with him to his grave. The file stayed in the cabinet. The family kept asking. The answers kept hiding. And the man who had known everything since the morning of November 22, 1987, who had woken up that day and gone about his life and attended the funeral and comforted the family and kept breathing while Gail and Rick did not, was still free. Still living in Ottawa County. Still walking around like anyone else. But 2009 was coming. And with it, 2 detectives who had never met the Wyngarden family, never driven past that house on Ransom Street, and carried zero loyalty to anyone involved. Fresh eyes. Old file. And a pillow from the wrong room that nobody had fully understood yet. In 2009, Ottawa County formed a cold case unit. 2 detectives. 1 assignment. No new cases, no distractions, just the ones that had been sitting in cabinets waiting for someone willing to go all the way back to the beginning. Those 2 detectives were Dave Blakely and Venus Repper. Neither of them was from Holland. No history with the families. No inherited assumptions. No old loyalties pulling them in any particular direction. They walked in as complete outsiders. And in a case like this one, that was not a disadvantage. That was everything. When they pulled the Brink file, the age of the documents hit them immediately. Yellowed pages. Handwritten notes from investigators long since retired. Some had deteriorated so badly that Blakely and Repper had to tape the pieces back together before the words were even readable. Think about that image for a moment. 2 detectives sitting at a table carefully taping together the broken fragments of a story that had been left unfinished for over 20 years. That is exactly what they were doing. Piece by piece. Page by page. They conducted over 200 interviews. Some witnesses had moved to other states. Blakely and Repper traveled to find them. Venus operated on a belief that guided every single conversation she had. She said it plainly. Loyalties change. Guilt grows. Secrets get heavy. The person who lied to protect someone in 1987 might have spent 2 decades regretting it. Time does not just blur memories. It shifts people. It erodes the reasons they stayed quiet. They were counting on exactly that. From the very beginning, one name kept appearing in the old notes. Not flagged. Not highlighted. Just present. A name that surfaced in statement after statement like something nobody had ever thought to look at directly. Ryan Wyngarden. Gail's older brother. The more they read, the more the pattern sharpened. Cheryl, Gail's older sister, had kept detailed notes over the years. She told detectives that just 3 days after the murders, while the family sat together and shared an open grief, Ryan had started talking about the crime scene. He described someone walking down that hallway. He described Gail lying in the waterbed, turned to her left side. He described the room with a precision that made absolutely no sense for someone who had not been there. And then he said something that should have stopped the entire room. He said, "You know, sometimes I wonder if I could have done this." The family had absorbed it as grief. As shock. As the kind of desperate, disoriented thing people sometimes say when they are broken and do not know what words to reach for. But read that sentence again now, knowing what we know, and it lands completely differently. When the family had first been told about the deaths, Ryan had stood up and gone straight to the house. No questions. He did not ask which hospital. Did not ask whether there had been some kind of mistake. He simply went directly, as if he already knew exactly where to find them. After the funeral, before the flowers had even had a chance to wilt, Ryan approached a family friend about buying Gail's waterbed. The very bed in which the tragedy had unfolded. He was trying to turn it into cash before she had barely been buried. Not grieving. Transacting. He went through Gail's personal mail without being asked. Found letters from men in her past. Burned them in a barrel outside the house. Told the family he was protecting their parents from seeing them. Nobody had assigned him that job. Nobody had asked him to decide what pieces of Gail's life got to survive her. Then there was the Aunt Nava. She told detectives that on the actual day of the murders, hours before Rick and Gail were killed, both Ryan and Gail had called her separately. Gail called to say Ryan owed her money. She had co-signed his car loan and had been covering payments he was not making. Ryan called to say Gail had changed, that she thought she was better than the rest of the family now, that she would not let their parents park their camper on her property. 2 separate phone calls. Same day. Both of them frustrated and venting to the same person. That night, 2 of them were dead. And at the funeral, Ryan leaned over to Nava and said something that should have stopped every conversation in that room. He said, if they had just let Mom and Dad park the camper, they would still be alive. He said that. At her funeral. But the detail that cut deepest came from an ordinary phone call, approximately 13 years after the murders. Cheryl had been talking with Ryan about nothing in particular. Somewhere in the conversation he mentioned a rodent in his yard. He said it casually, the way people mention small things in passing. He said, I pulled out my .22 and shot it. Cheryl paused. She had not known Ryan owned a .22. She asked him about it. Ryan caught himself immediately. The sentence was barely finished before he started walking it back. He said he had misspoken. It was a different gun. Not a .22. In the world of crime investigation, the truth does not always come out in a dramatic confession. It does not always arrive with music swelling behind it. Sometimes it leaks out in a single syllable. A number. A caliber. A detail that slips through before the brain catches up with the mouth. The weapon that killed Gail and Rick Brink was a .22 caliber revolver. The one that was never found. And 13 years after those murders, the man who had been inside that house on the night they died let the caliber slip in a casual phone call about a rodent and corrected himself the very second he realized what he had said. That detail went straight into the file. Blakely and Repper went back to the alibi Ryan had given in 1987. He and his girlfriend Pam had been doing laundry at a friend's house, babysitting her kids. Pam had confirmed it. The original investigators had accepted it and moved on. Here is the thing that made both detectives go completely quiet when they found it. Nobody had ever called the friend to verify. Not one investigator in 1987 had picked up the phone and asked the friend directly whether Ryan and Pam had actually been there that night. The alibi had been accepted entirely on the word of two people who were in a relationship with each other. That was it. That single failure, that one lazy assumption, had kept a killer walking free for over 20 years. And buried deeper in the same file was something even more striking. During the original investigation, Pam had agreed to take a polygraph examination. Her written statement matched Ryan's alibi perfectly. But during the actual test, when the examiner asked her directly whether she had been with Ryan on the night of the murders, Pam had answered no. No deception detected on that answer. That result had been sitting in the file the entire time. Seen apparently by no one who acted on it. Blakely and Repper tracked down Crystal, Ryan's ex-girlfriend from 1987. She came unwillingly, answered questions calmly, confirmed basic details about Ryan's life during that period. The interview moved forward without anything significant emerging. They thanked her, gathered their notes, began to rise from their chairs. Crystal said, "Actually, there is one more thing." Both detectives sat back down slowly. Crystal told them that in the week after the murders, Ryan had come to her. He had wanted to drive past the house on Ransom Street and look at it. The crime scene. Crystal refused. She wanted nothing to do with that house or anything connected to it. So instead they drove to a park on the north side of Holland and parked the car. Ryan sat there for a while without speaking. Then he said he had something terrible he needed to get off his chest. It took him several minutes to actually begin. And then he told her that he and Gail had been sexually involved since childhood. That it had started when he was 12 years old and Gail was 9. He called it mutual curiosity. He called it exploration. He said it had all been consensual. Crystal did not believe that then. Detective Blakely did not believe it now. A 9-year-old child cannot consent to anything. What Ryan was describing, whatever carefully chosen words he used to soften it and reframe it and make it sound like something it was not, was abuse. It had started when Gail was 9 years old and it had continued as they grew older. And the last time it happened, Gail had said no. Ryan had forced her anyway. He told Crystal this himself. Sitting in a parked car at a Holland park, days after his sister's funeral, he had described raping his own sister and then looked to the woman he was dating for sympathy. But Crystal was not finished. She told detectives about a boat trip. Ryan, Gail, and Rick had gone out on the water together. Gail was wearing a bikini. And Ryan, on a boat in front of her husband, had been unable to stop staring at her. Not the way someone glances at a person. The way someone stares when they have no control whatsoever over what they are doing. Ryan had shown Crystal a photograph from that trip. He pointed at Gail and said, "Look how hot she is." He described how he had spent the entire boat trip captivated by her, staring, consumed. And then he described the moment Rick had noticed. Rick had looked at Ryan, and the look between them had said everything without a single word being spoken. Ryan had felt exposed. Seen. Like Rick had just looked directly at the thing he needed most to keep hidden from the world. Crystal had always known something was deeply wrong with the way Ryan talked about Gail. The comments that were too specific. The attention that was too intense. She had buried that discomfort for years. But sitting in front of Blakely and Repper, every piece of it finally came out. Now the detectives had what they had been missing. Not physical evidence. Something more powerful in this particular case. Motive. Clear, specific, and deeply personal. Ryan had abused his sister throughout their childhood. As Gail built a life with Rick, as she grew more settled and more trusting of her husband, the risk that she might finally tell him the truth had grown. And Rick had already noticed something on that boat. Ryan had seen it in his eyes. The man who killed them was not a stranger who came for money or revenge or by mistake. He was a man terrified of being exposed. A man who had convinced himself that what he had done to his little sister was something other than what it was. And a man who decided that silence was worth 2 lives. Blakely and Repper brought Ryan and Pam in for questioning. Ryan arrived trying to control the space before he even sat down. He insisted on being present for Pam's interview. Detectives refused. He pushed back hard. They held the line. Eventually he was made to wait outside, but he made absolutely certain everyone in that building knew he did not accept the arrangement. Pam walked into the interview room and sat down. Her hands were tight around the strap of her purse. She glanced toward the door more than once. She was mild, quiet, careful. The opposite in every way of the man waiting outside. The interview lasted 3 hours. For most of it, Pam held the line. She repeated the same story she had been telling for over 2 decades. The laundromat, the friend's house, together all night. The words came out practiced and flat, the way a rehearsed lie always does after enough repetitions. But then detectives told her about the polygraph from 1987. The one where she had answered no when asked if she had been with Ryan that night. The one that had been sitting in the file for 22 years waiting for someone to act on it. Something in her face shifted. Her gaze dropped. Her voice went thin. After 3 hours, Pam finally said it out loud. The alibi was false. They had gone to the laundromat together around 6 in the evening and were home by 8. Then Ryan left alone. She did not know where he went. She did not ask. She assumed he was dealing drugs. He had been struggling financially and that was how he made money at the time. He came back briefly. They were together for a short time and then he left again. She did not see him again until 9 the following morning. That was all she gave them that day. She would not say more. Ryan's grip on her, even from a waiting room down the hall, was still tight enough to hold her back from the full truth. By the end of the interview, Ryan was banging on the glass of the interrogation room, demanding she be released. Detectives let her go. But they were not done. Over the days that followed, Ryan left more than 30 voicemail messages for Detective Blakely. They ranged from barely coherent to openly aggressive. In one, he said, "I hate you and appreciate you at the same time. You are a necessary evil. You are barking up the wrong tree. I know nothing about it." In another, he accused the detectives of digging up dirty family history, threatening his wife, and targeting him unfairly. He also called his sister Cheryl. Told her he had forgiven her for an old family argument. That life was too short. That they should reconnect. That blood is thicker than water. This was October 2012. The same month he and Pam had just been interviewed by the cold case unit. The timing was not a coincidence. In January 2013, Blakely and Repper made a decision. They went to Pam's workplace without Ryan. Without warning. They told her quietly that they were a cold case unit. That this was all they worked on. That they were not going away. That the only thing they wanted was the truth. Pam agreed to come in. This time she drove herself to the station. Walked through the doors alone. No Ryan beside her, no one monitoring her, no one watching to see what she said or which direction she looked when she said it. She sat down across from the detectives and she looked different. Exhausted in a way that went all the way down to the bone. But steadier than she had ever been in any previous conversation with anyone about that night. Like a person who had finally made a decision and was done carrying the weight of the alternative. She started talking. She told them Ryan had returned to her door at 9 in the morning on November 22, 1987. He was crying. Shaking. He had been banging on the door until she opened it. She asked him what was wrong. He told her he had just killed Gail and Rick. She asked him to say it again. He did. Ryan told her he had gone to the house that night to talk about family matters. The camper. The money Gail owed him. The argument that had been building between them. It had turned into a confrontation. Rick had told him to leave and never come back. Gail had gone to bed. Ryan left. Then he came back 20 minutes later. He knocked on the door and told Rick he was having car trouble. Rick, still in his wedding clothes from 2 days earlier, work boots pulled on over his dress pants, walked outside to help. Ryan approached the Blazer. Rick rolled the window down. 2 shots. Close range. Rick never had a chance. Ryan walked into the house. Down the hallway. Into the bedroom. Gail was asleep in the waterbed, completely unaware that anything had happened. 3 shots. And then he walked back out. Pam sat across from the detectives with her hands folded flat on the table. And then she told them what came next. Later that same day, Ryan had called her. Asked if he could come over. She agreed. When he arrived, he did not take her inside. He drove her to Ransom Street. He pulled over near the house, got out, and forced her toward Rick's Blazer. She looked inside. Rick's body was still there. Ryan grabbed her wrist and pulled her into the house. Down the hallway. Into the bedroom. He lifted the blood-stained pillow from Gail's face. He looked at his sister. And he said, "Isn't she beautiful?" Then he turned to Pam and he said the words that would control the next 25 years of her life. He said, "If you tell anyone, if you go to the police, this will happen to you and your son." Pam had been carrying that moment since November 1987. Through a wedding. Through 3 children. Through 25 years of lying to police, to family, to herself. The secret had followed her into every room she ever walked into. It had sat beside her at every family gathering. It had stood next to her at the graveside while Gail and Rick were buried. And now, finally, it was over. Detectives did not wait. The moment Pam finished talking, they moved. Ryan Weingarten was arrested the same day. January 18, 2013. He did not resist physically. But the moment the charges were read, his expression hardened and he started talking immediately. Claiming Pam was lying. Claiming the detectives had manipulated her. Claiming he was being targeted unfairly. They searched his home and found a .22 caliber rifle. But the revolver, the actual murder weapon, the one Pam had watched him hold the morning after the killings, was never recovered. He had disposed of it somewhere in the 25 years he had been living free. The clothing he wore that night was gone too. Both had gone into the back of his car the morning after and disappeared from there. It did not matter. The case was no longer about physical evidence. It was about truth. And the truth had finally found its way out. From his jail cell, Ryan wrote Pam 29 letters. Some begged her to take back her statement. Others threatened her with God's punishment for betraying him. He called her a liar. He called her weak. He accused the detectives of abusing her, confusing her, forcing words into her mouth. He told her she would answer for what she had done. Every letter was logged. Every letter was added to the file. Every letter was another portrait of the man the jury was about to meet. Trial began in March 2014. Ryan Weingarten was 51 years old. More than 60 witnesses took the stand. The prosecution built their case layer by layer. The argument over the camper. The financial tensions. The fear of exposure. The jealousy that had been consuming Ryan for years while Gail built a life he could never touch and could never have. Jimbo Mitchum testified. Ryan's childhood friend. He described sitting down for coffee the morning after the murders and hearing Ryan describe exactly how his sister and her husband had been killed, in precise detail, before the rest of the family even knew the bodies had been found. Jimbo remembered that conversation. He remembered the details Ryan shared. Details that had no business being in the mouth of someone who had not been standing in that house. A forensic pathologist took the stand and noted something that had been sitting quietly in the evidence all along. The steering wheel of Rick's Blazer had heavy blood residue on it. Rick's head had rested there at some point. But his body had been found slumped toward the passenger side. The position of the body and the position of the blood did not fully match. Something had shifted after the shooting. Someone had moved him. Then Pam took the stand. She did not shake. She did not stumble. She looked at the jury and told them everything. The morning Ryan came to her door crying. The confession. The drive to Ransom Street. The bodies. The pillow. The threat. Every detail she gave matched exactly what she had told detectives in January. Her voice stayed level through all of it. Ryan lasted approximately 10 minutes before he lost control. He stood up from the defendant's table and started shouting at her across the courtroom. He called her a black-heart evil woman. Court officers moved in immediately. The judge had him removed from his own trial. When it was Ryan's turn to testify, he described his history with Gail as 3 isolated incidents of innocent childhood curiosity. He gave 3 separate accounts with shifting ages. 9 and 12, then 13 or 14, then 15 and 12. He said it had all been mutual. He said he would not have cared if Gail had ever told Rick. He said there was no motive. The prosecutors pressed him on every inconsistency. Every shifting detail. Every version of the story that contradicted the last one. Ryan started crying on the stand and said he could not understand why his wife and his sister were both testifying against him. He said he deserved to sue the county. The jury had heard enough. They deliberated for 4 hours. On March 28, 2014, they came back. Guilty. Both counts. First-degree murder. Ryan kept his head down as the verdict was read. As he was escorted out, he said it quietly to no one in particular. I didn't do this. Sentencing came on April 21, 2014. Ryan was given an hour to speak before the judge delivered his sentence. He used every single minute of it. He ranted about the unfairness of the system. He stared up at the ceiling and addressed God directly, asking why this was happening to a good man. He insulted the prosecutors. He insulted the detectives. He called the judge a liar. The judge told him if he did not stop, he would be bound and gagged where he sat. Then the judge described what Ryan had done. He called it a brutal execution. He called Ryan a cold-blooded, calculated, manipulative killer who had taken 2 lives without any regard whatsoever for the people those lives belonged to. 2 life sentences. No possibility of parole. Ever. Rick's brother Bud spoke outside the courthouse. He said they were grateful that at least now they had not just what happened, but why. He also said it had taken a great deal of courage for Pam to finally come forward, and that he appreciated her strength in doing it. Cheryl said something quieter. She said her sister had been waiting for justice for 27 years. And now, finally, she could go to Gail's grave and tell her it was done. That she could rest in peace alongside Rick. Dorothy Wingarden, Ryan and Gail's mother, never accepted the verdict. She went to her grave believing her son was innocent. She died on October 8, 2021, at 90 years old. Wendell had died 16 years earlier, never knowing the truth at all. And Gail never got to tell her own story to anyone. Pam divorced Ryan. 3 appeals were filed. 3 appeals were denied. Ryan Wingarden remains behind bars. Gail Wingarden just wanted to build a life. A home on 20 acres. A man who loved her. And a nursery at the end of the hallway with the right wallpaper and a crib exactly where she had already imagined it. She got 22 years. Ryan got 2 lifetimes behind bars. And somewhere between those 2 numbers is the full weight of what he chose to destroy. Before you go, I want to leave you with 3 questions worth sitting with tonight. Do you think Pam should have faced charges for staying silent for 25 years? Or was she simply another one of Ryan's victims? Someone he controlled so completely, someone he threatened so directly, that silence felt like the only option she had left? What detail in this case hit you the hardest? And this one, do you think Gail knew, in those final 2 weeks when her coworkers noticed she had gone quiet, that something was coming? Did she sense it? Did she almost say something to someone? Leave your thoughts in the comments below. Share this video if this case moved you the way it moved me. Subscribe if you are not already here, because we cover cases like this every single week, cases that deserve to be told correctly and told completely, with every name spoken and every detail honored. These stories only stay alive when people keep talking about them.